Hey, it's me, Eric. I'm going to be talking about a 40mm lens that I have been using. It's a Canon EF mount. Of course, you can use this on an EFS mount if you have any crop sensors as well as full frame sensors. And it's about $150 for this online currently, and it's probably one of the best budget camera lenses that you can buy. As well, it's a pancake. Look how tiny that is. Alright, so we're going to talk about the specs of this camera. This is a 40mm prime lens EF mount. It has a 2.8 f-stop with an STM motor. Now, it's not the quickest motor, but it's one of the quietest motor compared to the camera that I'm currently using with this lens. So this lens itself has an EF mount. So what that means, an EF mount is going to be used on a full frame sensor mount. So the back end, the full frame, the lens, the back of the opening is much bigger compared to an EFS mount. Now the EFS mount is a crop sensor. Crop sensors are going to make it look much smaller, of course, but the full frame is going to be a much bigger and much wider shot. Downside of this, that when you're using a full frame lens, it's for this camera, specifically this crop sensor, you're going to have a 1.6 crop. A 1.6 crop is going to give you a 64mm theoretically zoom, and so your zoom is going to be currently much tighter than this at the moment. So you have currently I'm using an 18mm to a 55mm, so it's going to be this close in terms of the zoom. But I think that one of the good sides about this is that you're going to learn how to use your camera much better, and as well as able to tell how well you're going to take your shots. And over the course of 6 months, this camera lens has served me pretty well in terms of getting really nice crisp images. And sometimes you don't really do too well with it, because initially when you're starting off with this lens, you don't really realize how good this lens is until you actually use it. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy this camera lens. I think this camera lens is one of the best ones that you can have in your accessories or bags of camera lenses. Now, $180 for this camera lens is actually not too bad, especially if you're going to be upgrading in the future. I think that when I buy things, I think about the things that I'm going to be buying within, 2 to 3 years down the road. And camera lenses are one of the things that you can actually keep for quite a while. And they're one of the things that I like about Canon specifically. It's because they're EF mounts. The EF mounts are actually quite nice on your DSLR, sets of series and stuff like that. And you're kind of going between cross-platform, which is quite nice. I think that they build really nice quality products, and they've been around for a really long time, and the price ranges between them are kind of really questionable. You have Canon who are really expensive, and you have Canon who are really budget towards people who are like me, who want to do like hobby stuff or enthusiast type of things. Because essentially, you have this 650D technically on this camera, and you have the other Mark II cameras that you look at, and those are really big price ranges between two. And if you look at the camera lenses, there isn't really one gray area for specifically crop sensors and full frames. And when you look at this lens, this is kind of like the love child of between a short, price to a really expensive price pancake lens. And this lens itself is not bad for the price, and I think that you can definitely benefit from using this as street photography or any types of tight frame that you can take of your subject. Also, I probably should try to show you examples of how, what this lens looks like when I put it in. So I'm going to do that for now and just show you what it looks like, and just be right back. Okay, so now this is currently on the 40mm Canon lens EF mount. So I've been using this 18 to 55mm lens from Canon. This is a IS2. It's a pretty old camera lens considering in terms of technology ranges from now. So this has served me really well in terms of doing anything from basic photography to really close macro shots. But it doesn't have that image quality of the crispness, as well as the bokeh that you can tell when you zoom out of focal range. And look how tight that is in terms of everything else in the crispness. And if you zoom in with your hand like that, the image quality is almost arguably better. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't really buy a lens like this. I think that a lens itself like this is actually quite nice for street photography. But the downside is that you can't really do vlog style with a hand's reach because the frame itself is really tight. And so this is an arm length distance, and having a camera this close to your face and then zooming and talking is very difficult to have any type of reference when you're in your background, because it doesn't really say a lot. You're just zooming into your face with the detail and stuff. unless you're looking for that kind of thing and you have a second person holding the camera a bit further away. But that is not something, one of the reasons why I would buy this camera lens if you are looking for something that's for vlogging style. Now, you should ask yourself, why should I buy this lens in terms of the 40mm lens? Now, the lens itself is actually very tight in terms of like street photography. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit further. And so as you can tell, the image actually quality doesn't seem too bad. And you have a really consistent variable in terms of actually understanding the light and the vignette effect when you have zoom lenses like these. And I think the problem with zoom lenses is that you do have a lot of variability that you have to make sure. You have the zoom, you have the f-stops. It's much tighter f-stops. This is only a 3 f-stop or 3.8 f-stop to all the way to a 22 f-stop, very tiny pinhole. And I think that you have a little bit of a problem with the variability with this. And now, when you use a 40mm lens, and a prime lens specifically, you have a lens that you have less variability in terms of trying to get your crops into, because you have the zoom, which is manually focusing in and out with the camera, as well as the focal distance in a much quieter and faster motor if you're doing some video work. Now, when you do video work, you wouldn't want to constantly adjust the focal distance as well as the focal length when you're doing that kind of things. And when you're doing photography, it doesn't really matter. You actually would want the fastest motor and the fastest speed to get to that focal distance when you're taking shots. Now, so the problem is with this lens is really the future proofing of stuff. So in terms of upgrade, you can't really upgrade from a ASPC crop sensor. You have problems with having the sensor being cropped only with a crop sensor lens. And so if you're using EF mount, for instance, this is the full frame that's currently using, you can actually upgrade it within the future. So if you're thinking about having to become an enthusiast to a professional type of grade camera to a full frame, it's a bit more expensive, but you do have a lens that is readily available for a full frame. And I always think about the constant future of what I'm going to be using with my lenses, because I think once I upgrade to a full frame camera, I can't really use this at all. It's going to be look cropped, and I'm not going to really utilize either or of these. And now, if you use a 40mm, you're not going to really utilize a 40mm lens in terms of its zoom. You're going to be using a 64mm theoretically on a crop sensor camera that you're currently using. And so those are the downsides you have to really think about. And I think that if you're going to start from the bottom, you might as well upgrade from the top, right? And so when you're using a camera lens like this, you might as well have the best picture quality as a lens and then kind of upgrade the body over time, because you can't really upgrade the camera lens. The camera lens is always going to be the same, and technology for camera lenses are consistently the same. In terms of the motor and the USMs and the IS motors and stuff like that, I think the USM motors are really at its peak performance. But other than that, I mean, most camera lenses are fairly similar, but upgrading a body on a camera, it's going to be much more expensive than a lens at this point. So I think the lens on a 45 or 40mm, is much better in terms of the progress of upgrading. And it's more like kind of future-proofing in some ways. Okay, so I'm going to really double down on terms of talking about the upsides and downsides of having a full frame lens, really. The prime lens itself, there's multiple prime lenses that you can definitely buy. Like you have the 50mm lens to the 25 to sometimes 15mm lens. And those are fairly expensive sometimes for prime lenses, especially if you're doing a full frame. Now, full frame on a crop sensor, you're going to actually have that 1.6 times zoom, which is really the downside you're going to be seeing, but you're going to have the upgradability of future proofing to having a full frame lens readily available when you switch between cameras. And I think that if you think about the future of what you're going to be doing within the next couple of months or year, if you're going to upgrade from a crop sensor to full frame, then it makes the most sense to buy an EF mount lens on a 40mm, but you're just not really going to utilize it at the moment when you're having a crop sensor. So if you have a crop sensor lens, for instance, is on the downside of not having an EF mount or something like this as a pancake lens, you do have the problem of not being able to utilize that fully on a full frame on a much more expensive camera. And so when you look at cameras, you should think about what you're going to be doing within the future. And I really emphasize this a lot because some people don't really realize like what they're looking for in terms of a camera. You could, of course, if you're going to keep a crop sensor all throughout the time that you're going to be using videos and editing videos, then it makes the most sense to invest in terms of crop sensor lenses because you're going to really utilize fully that lens itself. Now, if you're going to upgrade within the future with a full frame, you have much more variety to pick from. But the problem is they're more expensive, and if you do have a budget for that, then it's kind of like a take and give in some ways, because you don't really know if you're going to really invest in terms of like a couple $100 more in terms of having a full frame, because full frames are really expensive. And so having an EF mount 40mm pancake lens, it kind of is between in the middle, because you have a 64mm theatrical range. That range between those two are actually kind of like a love child between the budget side and the full frame. And so you have this thing where as a prime lens, it's actually not too bad. But if you're really going to invest in terms of like future proofing or future like seeing what you're going to be going, investing in a full frame camera lens is actually not too bad, especially for $180 for a full frame capable lens is not really that much of a deal breaker. I think that people could really benefit using lenses like these. But having to have a crop sensor and you're going to be using that for the next couple of years, then it makes sense to have some crop sensor lenses. It just means that you won't be able to utilize it when you upgrade to a different camera. And I think that the media in terms of going from 1080p to 4K or 1440p, really you're going to see that difference between the quality and how technology is evolving. And I think that having to invest in terms of a full frame eventually is going to be much more ideally, that's something that you have to look for. But other than that, you do have to figure out what your budget is and where you're going to be using it for. Because if you're just going to buy a camera just for some basic photography, then it makes the most sense to have a crop sensor lens. But, who am I to tell to buy the lens or not to buy a lens? So other than that, so who am I to tell who wants to buy like lenses like these and stuff like that? So it really just depends on what you're going to be using this for. If you have any questions in terms of this video, I think I pretty much concluded what my opinion I would want in terms of a camera. It's really just a future proofing or thinking ahead of what I'm going to be using these camera lenses for. And if you have any questions about this lens and how to get certain photography, I think that the one best tip in terms of taking photography and basic photography, especially for new beginners, is that you should always look at the background that you're shooting at. And I think that that is one key thing that it's really important when you look at stuff like this. But if you're looking for having some basic camera, you can't really go wrong buying this kind of lens, the 40mm EF lens. And so ultimately, if you have $180 to spend and you're looking for a prime lens that's pretty good, this lens was actually not too bad. But of course, you can always go to a 50mm. Ultimately, you just have to ask yourself that question, is this worth what I want to be spending on within the next 5 years? I don't know, I think so.